Okay, we're
Yeah.
live. Welcome. So for my viewers who aren't yet familiar with you, I just want to introduce you. This is Rabbi, Doctor, Professor, friend, mentor, Jeffrey Woolf. And I'm very honored that you're here to discuss Noach because you, I think, have a lot that you can shed light on in terms of, history is really in large part your thing. And
Yep.
you know, this is about where man goes wrong, individual and in a society. And there's a lot I think that hopefully we can talk about and have a discussion and maybe some advice in there. So I think that it's very fascinating that we have both in this parsha, both the story of Noach and the flood, and obviously where they went wrong there, why God destroyed the world when it happened at that time. And then I guess we can compare and contrast it to the Dor HaFlaga, the tower, the generation of the dispersion, the Tower of Babel, what they did wrong. Were they worthy of being destroyed and not destroyed by God because of the flood, or were they not worthy of being destroyed? And what exactly, where they erred, what you think, what your opinion is on that. All this I'd like to discuss.
Wow. A lot.
So that's the opening. You can take it from there.
First of all, I'm really, really happy that you invited me. I'm very honored. You're a real media personality. There's a lot of followers, and I'm honored to be included. There's lots of things to say about this parsha. I'd like to start with two things, which one is serious and one is light. One of the things that people notice when they talk about this parsha is what apparently are discrepancies in terms of the numbers, how long was the flood and how long was the water and stuff like that. The best discussion of this issue from both a scholarly and a religious perspective, I want to give a plug to a friend, is found in this book, which is called Anima Amin. It probably looks backwards on the thing. It certainly does on my screen. Anima Amin, Biblical Criticism, Historical Truth, and 13 Principles of Faith by Rabbi Professor Joshua Berman, which I highly, highly, highly recommend. It's don't get put off by the words biblical criticism. He is a person who is known in his actually ongoing efforts to show that, in fact, the traditional narrative and our traditional way of looking at the Torah not only is correct, but it also can be aligned with the biblical scholars' claims. I really strongly recommend it. That's number one. Number two, I don't know if you have any Bostonians who are viewers, but if you ever do, there is a special custom that Bostonians have. You've heard of Schlissel Challah, right? That
Sure.
You put a cake, whatever. Everybody has something. So this week is actually the custom in Boston is to buy ugat shayish, because it's marble cake. And those of us from Boston do not pronounce an R. So therefore, it's marble cake is marble cake, and you could be sure today's Wednesdays. You can be sure my kids will start reminding me, don't forget to get marble cake for Shabbat, because that's what we do. So that's just a little on the lighter side.
Came out of the marble, right? Cake, the love marble.
That too. Okay, now as far as the parsha itself is so chock full of things that it's hard to know where to focus. What I would like to take a look at, simply because one of the things I try to do in not just popular but more public presentations on Chumash, I try to include things that I heard from my teacher Rav Soloveitchik Zatzal, and I think some of the observations that he made, some of which were partly published, a small amount in like 2 pages in this book, Abraham's Journey, gave me ideas in terms of the broader perspective of how to approach the parsha. Not so much the flood itself, which is what usually attracts people's attention, but what led up to it and what followed. So let's take a look. The point of one point of departure is the fact that the Torah assumes, and this is where the Rambam has it in the beginning of Hilchot Avodah Zarah. The Rambam assumes that Adam, first man, Eve, Chava, the first woman, were very much aware of the fact that there was one God. Over time, however, as a part of a long process, which is not for now, their descendants sort of lost sight of that, and they were more dazzled by the physical material world that was in front of them. And in the end, they became detached from God. Maimonides says that, to the point that the very existence of God was no longer manifest. There were only a few people that were still monotheists in the world, which makes that one of the problems in today's society is and I'm going to make a lot of contemporary references because I think they're relevant. One of the things that people of faith feel nowadays is the sense of being alone. There's a lot of secularist, atheist triumphalism in the world, not just less in Israel, thank God, but certainly in the West and certainly in the United States. So the idea that people of faith are a minority and feeling somewhat besieged is not a new thing. The Rambam says that, in fact, except for Shem and Aver and a few others, people had really lost track of God. So what did they worship? What did they do? So apparently they became pagans. This is when paganism came into the world, and people were worshiping the stars, and they were worshiping the planets, and they were worshiping animals, and they were worshiping natural powers, and so on and so forth. But one of the things that really marks paganism is the fact that even though you ultimately, you really do try to satisfy or try to worship natural powers who become embodied as gods, in a very real sense, it's very narcissistic. There is a wonderful line. Let me see if I have my copy. It's very old and in very bad shape. Here it is. Oh, fantastic. This is a book that I've actually asked my children. It's one of the things about one of the nice things about Corona, maybe one of the few, is that is the fact that I ended up doing all of my teaching from this major part of my library, so I just have to reach over, whatever. There's a book called Mythology by a woman named Edith Hamilton, which is probably I think still the best collection of Greek and Roman and even Norse myths. To give you an example, the edition that I have, which I did not buy when it was just out, was from 1942. It's still very much in print, and she has amazingly the following statement. You can see the picture. All right, you see there's a Greek god at the top, and that there's a guy, and there's Egyptian and Babylonian gods on either side. Her line is, the gods, unlike the Egyptians, made their gods in their own image, which is for me, always been a very powerful statement, that if you're not subservient, if you don't have Kabbalat al-Malchut Shemayim, you end up worshiping yourself, because your gods are essentially just a reflection or an extension of you. So that's the case. So it's very narcissistic, and as a result, you basically you project yourself onto your gods. Notice the Greek gods and the Egyptian gods, for that matter, in terms of their behavior, are simply human beings, only more so. So that we have them do stuff that people themselves want, and as a result, you end up being totally caught up in yourself. And paganism is ultimately self-worship. And this is what you find in the age leading up to the flood. What characterized the flood? Ki yishchit kol basar et darko ha'aretz. All flesh, whether it was the animals, also just people, corrupted themselves, and in two interesting ways. One, Chazal, and Rashi hints at this, although it doesn't cite much of what Chazal to say. Basically, the self-indulgence and the self-obsession of the generation of flood was fundamentally or came to its highest or lowest, look at it, expression sexually. That there were absolutely no bars. There was everybody was having sex with everybody else, and animals were going min be'eno mino, which was the inverse of creation, where everything is lemino, right? Everything is supposed to be according to one of the things that the Torah does teach is the fact that kedusha finds expression within limits, and when limits are taken away, it becomes a disaster. It becomes, in fact, obscene. Notice that there's nothing greater for us to do than chesed, right? To do chesed is better than giving tzedakah, because tzedakah you can do with a check. But chesed, you have to give it, and you have to be involved, and you have to be emotionally involved when you do it. And yet one of the arayot, one of the forbidden sexual unions, is called chesed. So apparently when something is out of control or out of not delineated, it's bad. And things without limits are wrong. So hence, So hence the sort of self-indulgence means of the generation of the flood was that they had no breaks. They whatever they wanted to pleasure themselves or have, they just took and they just did, and at all of the rachim were bad. Interestingly, the Torah doesn't consider that, apparently, at least Chazal didn't consider that to be the worst of the worst, because the worst of the worst, ki malah haaretz chamas mipneihem. What's Hamas? Hamas is stealing. So it's interesting that there was not just a matter of lack of self-restraint vis-a-vis yourself, but it was also that there were no boundaries, that yours is mine and yours is mine and mine is mine, and everything. We're talking about total moral and legal collapse. And it was that the Rambam Shalom said, I can't. This is not possible. So that form of self-indulgent, hands-on, all bets are off type of paganism is what characterized the Mabul, which apparently caused it. That's the Dor HaMabul. Rosh Soloveitchik used to call that the Bnei Basar.
Right. Isn't it all under the same? I mean, the fact that the Hamas, the stealing and taking, is a lack of boundaries. I think that everything was, and we can relate to this today in terms of entitlement, and there are no boundaries because I deserve everything. So
you told me.
Right. So all boundaries, personal boundaries, property boundaries,
Correct.
Because it's not just stealing, you're stealing material objects from another person. You can take somebody's dignity by, if there's rape, that's taking something that's
Absolutely.
not yours. It all comes from, I think that's why, it always hit me that we learned that, the Mabul, and they teach you that it stemmed from petty theft. And I think because we always minimize the small things in life, but nothing big ever happens in a bubble. It all starts when you just don't respect one small thing, and then it kind of blossoms out from there, and then you end up doing horrific things, because horrible things don't just happen. People don't just become horrible, abusive people just like that. It starts in small increments, and I think that's what it's trying to teach. And when you don't respect somebody's boundaries, you feel entitled, you can take anything of anybody's because you deserve it. And I think that's...
But it's more than that. Yes, there's a flip side to that, though. First of all, Chazal say on many occasions, "Kola overa aveira b'shoneh b'nasa lo heter." That if you do an avera one time and you do it again, it's going to be allowed. So Chazal say, "What? It's allowed? What do you mean it's allowed?" No, you get used to it. So even whatever disinclination you had, reservations you had about doing an avera or hurting somebody, after the mafioso kills his third guy or second guy, it's just another person. But what's striking, I wanted to pick up what you said about even small theft. It's what's it called, petty theft.
Yeah.
You're very, very right, and there's more to it. I think there's even more to it than that. The Rambam in the end of, I forget if it's in Geneva, at the end of Hilchot Geneva or Hilchot Gezeilah, neither, which is a mitzvah, right? He mentions in passing that there is an element of, he says, shvichut damim, element of murder in theft. Now, when you think about it, there's a lot to that. Even though he says it sort of en passant, when we buy something, okay, I know we say, when we buy something, we buy because we want it. Now, there was something in that action which expresses something of us. Our possessions are an extension of ourselves. So if you steal something from me, first of all, I feel violated. And your mention about sexual violence is absolutely correct. But even something lesser severity, if you steal something which is mine and which I bought because it expresses something I needed, or it expresses something I feel emotional attachment to, then you've hurt me, and a part of you really, there's an emotional attachment, which it's not just to things, it's to why you had this thing in the first place. So slowly chipping away at the rights of another person. It's not just a matter of you're not only taking their rights, you're hurting their person.
Right. Which reminds me of Yaakov going for the Pachim Ktanim, because he identified even with the small things. It was a part of his mouth. Everything was important to him, and I think it speaks to that.
Now, that doesn't mean, obviously, we don't value things over people.
Right.
But there is this idea that you don't decide what's important to somebody else, or that you deserve more than anyone else. So it cuts both ways. I mean, the lack of respect for another person's space, which is another part of this, because a person has his dalit amos, right? Is a violation. All of these are violations, but they're no longer any violation because it's all about me. It's all about me. So I don't care about you, because satisfying my needs, whether they're physical, whether they're sensual, whether they're intellectual, whatever the case might be, that's what's more importantly. And therefore, I am. What would you say? Cancel. I would, if this were 6 months ago, I would have said I erase you.
Right.
But but tell us, I'll cancel you, because you don't. As far as I'm concerned, you don't exist, because my satisfaction, whatever's I'm trying to satisfy, is more important than anything else. And you could even tell yourself a lie that, and I represent the absolute truth, and what are you? So that kind of total breakdown, at least according to Chazal, the way the Rambam seems to read it, is a result of it's a form of paganism. This is when we say paganism. We really don't mean, we think only about idols and stuff like that. It's funny, the Rambam and other poskim don't make statue making. When they look at the Ten Commandments, they don't see statue making or adoration of idols as the quintessential avodah zarah. Quintessential avodah zarah is simply attributing. This is a definition that is not mine. It was first formulated this way by my teacher, my friend, Rabbi Dr. David Berger at YU, is to attribute divinity, or to worship as God, or to see as God, or as your highest sort of value, that which is that someone or something which is not God, which can be you. Because ultimately you're just an individual. Then you are God. All of that is very pagan. You don't need Jupiter, and you don't need Baal, and you don't need Vishnu to be able to be a pagan. In fact, I just read who did I just read? Timothy Leary. Timothy Leary, who was famous in the 60s for advocating extensive use of LSD. He was on the sort of the radical left of the student movement then, said our aim is to bring back paganism to get past the restrictions of monotheistic religion. So it's not, so these are the things that come back. It's not like maybe it's good that God promised not to make another flood, It takes one thing off the agenda.
Yeah, but you know what? Even unfortunately, there can be paganism within Judaism. You see people.
Absolutely.
You see people that create, the halach or God after their own image, and it's unfortunately that which turns so many otherwise people who would want to adhere off, because they look at that as representing, even though that is not representing and that's reprehensible, but it turns people off because unfortunately I think this desire, this pagan desire, is strong in even the best of us, and that we have to be wary at all times what we're doing and how we're doing it and why we're doing it, to keep a cap on that, because it's so easy to fool yourself to think that you're not pagan in that way. But I think that it really speaks to the base of most of us.
Oh, no question. In fact, I'll take it one further. I have a story which I don't think I've ever told publicly, again about Rav Soloveitchik, which actually confirms your observation and takes it further. We were once talking. I'm not going to go into it. It's about a certain book, and we got off on a discussion of the attitude of people towards mitzvot. And he said one of the dangers which exists among people who are actually shomer mitzvahs is the fact that they see mitzvot as an end to themselves, or as isolated from a sense of accepting God's dominion or filling God's will, or so on and so forth. He says, if you do that, if you talk about it, let's do it further. If you talk about halacha, this is where we're rewording it. But if you talk about halacha or mitzvot as ends in themselves and not part of avodas Hashem, then they become ceremonials, nothing more.
Uh-huh.
And ceremonialism is paganism, because basically it's just actions taken that are nice, they're aesthetic, whatever. But he said, unless there is spiritual and intellectual and moral content, or that's the atmosphere or the ambiance in which you do the mitzvahs, that is fundamentally that is ceremonialism, and ceremonialism is ultimately pagan. And it took me a long time to really to process that comment. I remember walking out of wasn't his living room. He was living with Professor and Mrs. Tversky, walking out to the street, and it took me about like a day or so, and finally it hit me that he was basically saying that improperly done mitzvahs can also become an avodah zarah, and there's even a proof from the Mishnah. The Mishnah says when Moshe Rabbeinu, when there was a plague of snakes, and the Jews were being bitten in the desert. So God tells Moshe Rabbeinu, make a copper serpent, put it on top of a thing, and they'll all and if he looks at the nachash, will be cured. So Chazal in the Mishnah and Rosh Hashanah say, what is it, the nachash does something? I mean, the nachash is a nachash. Why nachash meimitu mechayeh? So, but rather, what the point of the nachash was to cause those who have been bitten to transcend or get past their immediate pain, to look up towards God, and once they prayed to God, they raised their eyes up, caught their attention of the nachash, the remembrance of God further higher, then they would be cured. What happened to that nachash? The nachash ended up in the time of Chizkiyahu, ended up becoming an avodah zarah. Ended up being worshipped. It was called the Nechushtan, a word which most Israelis know because it's the name of the elevator company. Nechushtan Schindler. If you see on the side of the thing, there's always this little picture of the Nachash and Nechoshet. But the point, and he destroyed it. Why keep worshiping it? But more strikingly is that the Gemara in Sanhedrin says that Chizkiyahu destroyed the Nechushtan. V'hodu Chachamim. The Chachamim thought that they congratulated him for doing that. Now think about that for a minute. You have a relic from the time of Moses. This is 500 years later, and some fanatic goes and he breaks it into pieces. Can you imagine UNESCO would have condemned Chizkiyahu, and Chazal like, no. This has become an end in itself, an object of worship. It no longer serves to the avodas Hashem, and therefore it has no further purpose, and therefore no right to continue existing. So it's a very so what you're saying is absolutely right. So the mitzvot improperly done, especially if they become used to be hurtful, are an avodah zarah. They're contrary to purpose. Now that doesn't mean that we always need to know what the mitzvot mean.
Right.
But it has to be done in a mitzvot have to be performed in an aura or an atmosphere of submission to God and even of emunat mimah, that there is a reason for these things and so on, and that's enough. But if it's just by itself because I like candles or because I like the way it feels, that's not legitimate.
Right. Exactly. Okay. So, and I would like to we got a little bit sidetracked, but to get back on track, I would like to take a look at the Dor Haflaga, the story of the Tower of Babel, and how do you? I mean, I've been working on it. I came up with a few of my own theories, but I would be very interested to know how you see it as what went down, as what was the sin. It's a little bit shrouded in mystery, and it's not written very clear cut, and I think it's open for interpretation. And do you see it in and if you do see it in contrast to the generation of the flood, what do you think went wrong in between? Because obviously they know what happened. Noach's still alive. They know of the flood. Right. Where did they go wrong? Why did they go wrong? What do you see in there?
Well, I think that there were two episodes which are a direct result of the flood. In typical Jewish fashion, there are two episodes with three meanings, and I think they all have to be looked at together. So first of all, when or actually four ways. Look at the way, and I'm sure I'm not the first person to say this. Look at the way that Noach and his family respond to the flood. Okay. Noach comes out of the ark. He sacrifices to God. He thanks God. God gives him the Sheva Mitzvos B'nai Noach, 6 of which were given to Adam, but because he got the 7th, he gets the prize. He gets to be the person after whom they're named. And he proceeds to get absolutely drunk. All right. Now, while he's drunk, comes Cham, and he does something to him. The Torah says he saw that he had just he became exposed. Chazal and Rashi quotes 2 possibilities, say no, there were 2 things he did. Cham did not just see his nakedness, meaning see his vulnerability, if you want. So Rashi says there were 2 possibilities. He either castrated him or he raped him. Okay. Those are 3, when you think about it, those are 3 ways of responding to horrible disaster. And the truth of the matter is, and this is maybe for a longer discussion, in the period during and after the Black Death, we have almost precisely the same modes of reaction. And in the world of Corona, you see it here and there too. So let's see So if Noach got drunk, it sounds like a person who just can't take it. Whether he can't take being in this new world, whether he feels guilty, he might feel survivor's guilt, certainly. He'd rather be totally inebriated and not have to cope with this new world. Can't exist in this new world. All of his friends are gone, whatever the case might be. So he's just out of it. Cham, his response, we'll get to Yefet and Shem a little later. Cham's response could be one of 2 things. A, he castrates him. Why would he castrate him? Well, castration in this case is certainly an act of anger, but if you're castrated, you can't have more children. In other words, there are those who respond to disaster, to whatever, and there's a movement like this. No more children. The world is too horrible a place to have children. Mankind doesn't deserve to exist anymore. And as a result, he said, "That's it. I'm stopping. That I can control myself. I'm stopping this now. I'm not letting Noach have any more children." And you hear people today, by the way, say, "I can't bring a person to this world." If he raped him, that could be because he's acting out and he's doing the most humiliating thing he can do to the earlier generation, and he wants to just, he wants to wipe them out and start from scratch, because this is clearly an act of anger on his part, and he's trying to get back at the previous generation who left us this terrible world. And I think it's against that background you have to see Migdal Bavel. What's Migdal Bavel? Migdal Bavel. First of all, it's interesting. They're all speaking the same language. Everybody's together. I just want to add something which I heard recently which blew my mind. There is it's not always so interesting, but when you're looking for a podcast on something, you settle for what there is. There is a very detailed podcast called The History of the English Language. He doesn't start with the English language. He starts with Proto-Indo-European, which is the earliest language, non-Semitic language that had been documented. And it turns out that literally every single language from India to England is descended from this one language, which really don't have much of, but there is this one language, which would mean that in terms of Semitic languages, the same thing would be true. So this idea that there was one language and everything developed off of that is not bizarre. It's now, from a scholarly point of view, proven that there was, and all Mishamit Batzla Kol Haaretz. So I just thought I heard this and I go, oh, that's cool. But
right.
It's one of these things that you always discover when there's nobody around to tell. So you have to keep it to yourself. Anyways, Migdal Bavel is an attempt. I think has a few things. First of all, they want to take over heaven. Man wants control. Man wants control. God punished us. We're not gonna let that happen again. We want control. We want, and control requires a couple of things. Control requires ambition. Control requires a certain degree of violence, and control also requires discipline. So one of the interesting things about Migdal Bavel that people don't notice is the fact that it's the inverse, or the other side of Dor HaMabul. And this is Rav Soloveitchik used to always quote. And there's even a passage I'm going to quote you from Pirkei Rabbi Lezer that he used to cite. If the Dor HaMabul was a generation in which everybody did whatever they wanted, the Migdal Bavel was a totalitarian state. We are all doing this for the greater good, but for nobody in particular. And the expression thereof is found in Pirkei Rabbi Lezer, chapter 24. Pirkei Rabbi Lezer tells the following story. Pirkei Rabbi Lezer is a late ancient, early medieval midrash from Eretz Yisrael, and the midrash says as follows: Sheva ma'alot hayulo lamigdal mimizracho, v'sheva mimaravo. There were 7 stairs up and 7 stairs down. The use of 7 obviously is important too. Ma'alim et halaveinim mikan. They would schlep up the bricks from one side, the yordim mikan, and they would walk down the other side. So it was constant motion to build up the tower. Im nafal adam vamet. If a guy fell down, a person fell down and died. Lo haya samim let libam elav. They didn't pay attention. Im nafla leveina achat. However, if one brick fell down, hayu yoshvim uvochim, they would sit and they would cry. Ve'omrim oy lanu matai ta'ala acheret tachtel. My God, when is somebody going to go and replace this brick? Ve'avar Avram ben Terach ve'ra'a otam bonim et ha'ir ve'kilalam b'shem Elokav ve'amar bila Hashem paleg l'shonam. Avram Avinu happened to see walk by. He came by and he saw them building the city. He cursed them in the name of his God, saying, "May God swallow them up and divide their speech." What do you have a story? You have a story here of a totalitarian society which has decided that they're going to, in the interest of man's supremacy as a whole, man in general, not anybody in particular, they're going to impose extreme discipline on the society. This is the mirror image of Dor HaMabul. But here, in the name of an abstract principle of supremacy, individuals mean nothing. The only thing we're going to do is going to coerce every single person to a greater good, and that way, with that kind of discipline, with that kind of force, first of all, we won't have the situation in which a God would want to destroy us again, and number two, in which the idea is more important than any individual life. And Avram Avinu walks by and he curses them, and in the end, God comes down and he stops the project. What the Medrash is adding, that not only that people are going to, so you see mankind trying to figure out in a godless universe. Notice the Medrash says B'Shem Elokav. It's not their gods, his God, our God. That in the absence of God, in the absence of a Kabbalat Mulchut Shamayim, and the realization that we are subject to our Creator, man will go to extremes. He'll either be self-indulgent and violate every norm there is in the interest of self-satisfaction, or he will violate, or he will totally dehumanize, or he totally devalue other people in the interest of some ideal which he has set up as his God, which is therefore more important than anybody else, and for which people have to pay with their lives. I always think in this image of the fact that it is well known, when they built the Great Wall of China, if a worker would die, they would just chuck him into the wall. And it's a big, I always had a shiloh where the Kohanim could walk on the Great Wall of China because there are people buried inside. So these are the extremes to which man goes in the absence of God. So the fact that the person who curses them is Avram Avinu is exactly the point. Because Avram Avinu is the answer. Avram Avinu, who's the one who recognizes that God has to be that the only way for mankind to be truly free and to be truly human is to accept the kingship of heaven and not the kingdom of himself or the kingship of another man, of another person, or the kingdom of some kind of abstract idea. once you have that, then man realizes his limitations, and both of the extremes then find their proper place. Um, whether it's a matter of, on the one hand, yes, people have a right to certain degree of self-expression and self-satisfaction, and there's Judaism is not a religion of asceticism. On the other hand, it's not, there are no limit, there aren't limits. There are limits, rather. There are limits, and similarly, on the other hand, there's room for discipline, but not if it destroys a person's humanity. And it's the merging of the two in the vision of worship of God that Avraham Avinu brought that stopped Maimonides says, it stopped mankind from sort of descending permanently into the abyss. So the truth of the matter is, if that looked at that way, in order to understand what Avraham Avinu achieves, you need to be able to balance or to compare and contrast Dor HaMabul and Dor HaPlaga, because they're really two sides of the same coin.
I want to ask you a question that brings us back to the beginning of the parsha, because you brought up Abraham, and right away when they bring up Noach, Ish Sadiq Haya B'Dor Tav, and Rashi asks L'gnai Shvach if it's to his whether this is praise or whether it's speaking disparagingly of him, and there's both opinions. People choose one or the other. And I wanted to know, because they said, of course, because if he was in the door of Abraham, he would be considered klum, nothing. And I wanted to know, does that resonate with you, or what do you think? Are you on the Gnai camp or the Shvach camp? Which one do you?
It's clear. I think that I wouldn't want to have been Noach. I think he didn't have an easy life. I think that what he achieved, and I think that he deserves credit for that. And we don't have the right to choose when we're born. So I katonti, but I don't really understand what Chazal were trying to get at. We don't have a choice. We have a choice when we're born. We're all born at a certain time, and we're born at a certain time with a certain mission. And it takes a long time for us to figure out what our mission is. But if we were born with our talents and our history and our sensitivities in another time, then we wouldn't be able to achieve anything. That might be the klum. I mean, what Noach was able to do in terms of persevering and in terms of bringing his family and organizing the ark and suffering, according to Chazal, the ridicule of generations of people making fun of him. And so on. I think he deserves, for his time, he was exactly what the world needed. Now, was he as great as Avraham Avinu? No, but I don't know if Avraham Avinu his time wasn't to be in the time of the flood. His time was to do something much greater, but afterwards. So yeah, so Noach is apparently both according to the Tanakh was a more dependent individual. He was a guy that knew how to. He was a bitzuist. Give him his orders, he'll go do it, and he'll do it well, and he'll do every single thing that God tells him to do. The minute that's over and he doesn't know what the hell to do with himself, then he gets drunk and he can't function. So yeah, so he is a flawed individual, but for purposes of getting all these animals and all this stuff into the ark and saving part of mankind, he did a job. Look, if Noach were really supposed to be viewed as a negative personality, then Jews wouldn't name their kid Noach.
Right.
It's very simple. Yeah. I mean, I'll tell you. So I'll give you two interesting examples. So, for example, Jews up until the rise of Islam named their kids Yishmael.
Right.
Why? Because he did tshuva b'asher husham, right? The minute Yishmael became a politicized thing with the Muslims, so no more Yishmael. Jews don't name their kids Eov. Arabs do, for all kinds of reasons. But Jews don't name their kids Eov because Eov is not a positive figure, and he never quite gets it in the end either.
Right.
As much as he suffers. So that the fact that Noach is a perfectly legitimate and in fact more than legitimate name, shows that he has value. To compare him to Avram Avinu, Avram Avinu is a whole different ballgame. Avram Avinu, yes, Avram Avinu is a person who knows how to be self-reliant. Avram Avinu is a person who knows how to find God on his own, according to the Rambam, according to the Rabbi too. Whether he was 40, whether he was 3, it's a question of whether his awareness of God came through intellectual search first or intuitive revelation. That's the machlokas there. And he was able to stand on his own. I don't need to give you orders all the time. You can rely on your intuition. You can rely on God never really tells him where he's going. He knows it intuitively. He'll figure it out. So yeah, on a scale, if I had an absolute scale, so Avram Avinu is the greater individual. But as I said, I don't know that if Avraham Avinu in the generation of Noach would have been able to pull off the same thing, because different people have different koichos.
But also, you'd have to, I don't know if this, you'd have to think Avraham came after Noach. He had the luxury of learning from it's always on, the shoulders of, who knows, and you can't compare. And what really astounded me is when I heard the Rashi or all the Mefarshim, and I wonder, are they talking about a moral a moral standing that's you're able to compare, a moral relativism in terms of like, why should it make a difference? What's moral in the times of Noach should be moral in the times of Abraham. Why would you say that he's a tzaddik in this time, but not a tzaddik in that time? A tzaddik is a tzaddik is a tzaddik. I don't see
right, but that's not. The fact that they're both tzaddikim with the word.
But the word tzaddik is not even used. You think of tzaddik, it's word used for Noach, it's used for Yosef. I think to me, tzaddik implies just. It goes with Elohim, in line with Elohim. A tzaddik is someone who does what's right and just. It's a lawful thing. And you think of Avraham Avinu, you think of
it's also equally balanced. In other words, it's considered and you don't go beyond it. A chassid, for example, the big difference is a chassid and a tzaddik. A tzaddik is a person who not everybody can aspire to be a tzaddik, but they can't aspire to be a chassid. A chassid or a chassid is a person who always tries to do more than he's asked.
Right.
That's a natural tendency.
Right. That's why Avraham tried to save Sodom, because he was a chassid, to me. And that's why Noach didn't try to save these horrible people who are probably the same as Sodom and Amorah, because he was a tzaddik and he didn't go l'fnei Shurat Hadim. I just really quickly before I forget, because
by the way, that argument's still going on.
Yeah.
I don't want to. Let's do it this way. Within the Orthodox community, there are those who say we have to concentrate on in-reach and preserving what there is, and there are those who say no, we are responsible for all the Jews on the outside as well. And they're both two sides of the same coin. It's Noach versus Avraham Avinu. Now, so there can be extremes either way. You can be too self-constrained and too self-restricted. It can also be too all over the place as well. But that, in general, the two orientations are still very much at loggerheads and in tension with each other. And sometimes we all have a little bit of Noach in ourselves. We have a little bit of Avraham Avinu.
Right. I just want to take 1 minute just to defend Noach on something you said, because when we talk about Vayichal Noach and he goes out and he plants the vineyard, and everybody's like, okay, he's a tzaddik when Hashem says what to do, but as soon as he gets out, look, the planting a vineyard wasn't a sin in and of itself, and what he did, there was no sin involved. He drank. In my opinion, also, if you look at the pasuk and what it says in the pasuk, when it says V'yachal Noach, and then he was a man of the earth, and he planted the vineyard, and then he exposed himself in the tent. So for me, the theme from the beginning to the end of him planting the vineyard to expose himself in the tent, I think in my estimation, this is just based on the pasukim, that since when God gave him the command, him and his children the command when he came off the boat, it was on Noach as well. It wasn't just on his children. He still had a good 300 years on him which they were still giving birth. So it was a command on him. I think and also part in due to, and this is all theoretical, but in due to his name of Noach, and if you go according to the explanation that they said that he brought nechama to the, how do we say nechama? He brought comfort to the people because they had to work the land. And there's one explanation that he created this tool that it was easier. There's no thorns in the, so that he made it more. I guess he made more time available, kind of like any machine you would make in modern day. And I think, and what did the people do? They had this extra time, and instead of having more lofty pursuits, they went ahead and they were acting in these horrible ways. I think he had part of, not just survivor's guilt after the flood, but maybe feeling that he was part and parcel of bringing that about. Not just not having had him do tshuva, but maybe even, who knows? But I think that he had to. Now he has this command, and God even said that the nature of man is Rami Ne'orav. He's evil from the time of his youth, and all this is in Noah's consciousness. A whole world had to be destroyed. He's responsible now for populating the earth, and if he couldn't even, everything, all of his efforts to make, and I think he did have efforts in that sort of way. I mean, it's not, everybody always criticized him for not trying to bring the people back when he had all those years, but even so, I think there's so much difficulty bringing children into the world after that the fact that he wanted to plant a vineyard and to try to relax so that he can expose himself in the tent, meaning maybe have relations with his wife and repopulate the earth to be the tzaddik.
That's very nice.
He wanted to follow the will of God.
That's very nice.
Yeah, I know personally, I mean, I'm not shy to have a drink or two when I want to do something, like I want to go into Shabbos. I want to go into Shabbos. Okay, and Shabbos is, Erev Shabbos has always been a tricky time for me a day because there's so much nerves, getting so many things together, and that's a lot of times where I used to lose it. So now I've made it this minhag, have a drink, an hour, where I know where I used to lose it, have a drink, and then I'm relaxed.
You used to actually post the pictures of whatever you're drinking on Facebook.
Yeah. So, and then I go in relaxed into Shabbos, and I don't fall into that trap because I know God doesn't want me screaming at my family an hour before Shabbos. It's not the way to go into Shabbos. So, and it's worked for me. And I think of Noah, he's trying to do God's will. He's having a difficult time. He wants to do the right thing. And so I don't think of him as debasing himself. Even he exposed him in his own tent. I really see Ham as the the bad guy here, and I just.
So that would actually in both cases, the Rashi basically is giving you two options for the same shot. Pure Ravu is what Noach had been given. So whether he was castrated or whether he was raped, it's a homosexual rape, which means it can't lead to children. The idea being that the guy being, I'm going to stop this act of reconstruction, which you're trying to do. It's very excellent. Very nice.
Yeah. So I don't know, but I really think it's amazing because we started over from Bereshit. We're in Noah. I feel like God has it written down here. So many basic concepts that are the major downfalls starting from Adam, and I really think to Dora Flaga covers everything where we can go wrong. I mean, if the Torah would have stopped there, I think. If people would really pay attention, you can get the basics of what you need to do or not do.
That's the Tziv's reply to Rashi. Rashi sits there and says, well, we should have started by Chodesh Lachem, and what do we need this for, and so on. And then it says, no. The whole function of Bereshis and not leading up to Yetziat Mitzrayim is to learn how to be a mensch.
Right.
I mean, that's how you. I mean, Avraham Avinu had to deal with all kinds of people. He says, and we all have to deal with all kinds of people. If you don't know how to be a ben adam, then the Torah is irrelevant. It's not going to make you. It's not going to make. I mean, derech eretz kadma Torah, and so you're absolutely right. That's everything is here, and in fact, everything is in these two parshot because once you get Avraham Avinu, you get the answer to how to deal.
Right, and I think. The Torah wasn't given till when it was given. And I don't think necessarily, I think that us being given handed down a physical Torah that we have to learn and all the commandments that we have to do was because we had such a hard time with getting to it where we could have potentially have understood it from God from the beginning. And I just think that that's really I think that's plan B, because we were so faulty and we were never able to get it. And so the only reason we don't start is because ideally we shouldn't have to be told. I don't think we should be having to be told the 613, and we shouldn't have to. It's just a training. It's a retraining of, we have to train our whole body to realign with our soul, that I think was only due to our downfall in the first place. You know?
Oh, look at that. I mean, but that's exactly what we're just talking about. It's a combination of Avraham Avinu had intuition, and therefore he sort of intuitively knew what to do it. But you need a certain amount of discipline. So the Dora Plaga wasn't wrong, that in order for man to be able to prevent himself from having a disaster like it just gone through, that you need discipline. They turned it into an avodah zarah. Everything has to be very, very carefully modulated, and everything in nuance and balance is exactly the point.
Right.
It's exactly the point. And that's what Avraham Avinu apparently, and now the Rambam seems to have thought so as well. That it's a long story, but the Rambam seems to hints at in his discussion at the beginning of Hilchot Avodah Zarah to the idea that the entire dynamic of man is to go between humility and ambition, between intuition and discipline. And when things get out of sync, extremes are by definition bad. They're always destructive.
It's so interesting because those things that you say, it sounds like it's between the ego and the self and the godliness. The two opposites of what you're saying, because it's the godliness in us, and then there's the ego, and then it's to find that perfect balance, because we are not God, we are limited, so we have to put those boundaries, but just enough boundaries to still let the God seep in, and the creative ability and the conquering and all that. So yeah, that's incredible. I think we're going to end it here on that note. And I want to just thank you so much. This was fascinating.
My pleasure. Anytime.
And I hope that you will do another one again. God willing, I hope to have an interview with different personalities every week. And then, after you've had break enough, hopefully you'll come back and you'll do another.
The Kef of Kavod. Shabbat Shalom.
Thank you so much. Shabbat Shalom.
My pleasure. Bye.
Okay, I stopped recording. Let's see.